Welcome to our webinar. We really appreciate you being here. This is Linkage Facilitation across the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network. I'd like to start by thanking the JCOIN Coordination and Translation Center and Dr. Faye Taxman for hosting this. I'd also like to thank Julia Rosenberg and others at the Addiction Policy Forum for organizing this webinar. I don't see my slides up yet. Are they being projected and I just can't see them? Great, thanks a lot. Okay, super. So I'll be the moderator. I'm Dr. Lynn Stein, and Dr. Dennis Watson is our discussant. Next slide, please. These are the list of the hubs involved in JCOIN and the presenters. Brown Hub has Dr. Anthony Kotzer-Liversage and Machisti Rankin. The Chestnut Hub has Dr. Christine Grella and John Palmer. University of Chicago Hub has Maggie Kaufman. The Kentucky Hub has Dr. Martha Tilson. We have two Yale Hubs. The first has Dorel Clayton presenting, and the Yale HIV Hub has Dr. Sandra Springer and Stasia Stuccio presenting. I'd like to thank each and every one of them. And please, if you have any more information on yourselves to introduce, please do so when we get to your presentation. Next slide, please. Thanks. So what can you expect today? Intros hopefully will be fairly short. The sites are going to summarize their work in linkage facilitation. And then after the sites summarize what they're doing, we'll have a presentation on a taxonomy of linkage facilitation that we've come up with and some of the common activities that linkage facilitators do. Each presentation is about 8 minutes, and then at the end, we'll have a discussion run by Dennis. And there'll be time at the end for question and answer. So please do save your question and answers for the end. The CTC will track time for us so we can move along. Next slide. I don't think, okay, so go back to the other slide, please. I'm not ready for Christine yet. Thanks. One more thing I'd like to note before we jump into the presentations is Dr. Laurie Ducharme is a big part of our efforts here. She is currently at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. She serves as the NIDA project scientist for the HEAL-funded JCOIN. And HEAL, by the way, stands for Helping to End Addiction Long Term. She's been a program official at NIH since 2008, overseeing a portfolio of research grants that apply implementation science to increase the adoption and sustained use of evidence-based treatments. And I could say a lot more about Laurie, but for the sake of time, I'll stop there and I'll let Laurie take it. Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you, Lynn. And welcome everyone. On behalf of NIDA and my colleagues here, I just want to say good afternoon and thank you for joining us today. We are really excited to bring you this webinar, which is the initial result of several years worth of hard work and collaboration by members of the JCOIN Research Cooperative. JCOIN is NIH's largest ever investment in research to improve service delivery in the criminal legal system. And at the core of JCOIN, there are 13 large multi-site clinical trials that are all looking at a variety of topics, all related to improving services to address opioid use disorder and overdose risk for individuals who are involved in the criminal legal system. 7 of those trials were specifically interested in testing interventions basically to help people not fall through the cracks as they transition from carceral settings back to the community. So either moving directly from jail or prison or in the context of probation and parole and needing to be connected to community-based treatment services. And those projects are testing a variety of these linkage strategies. And just to be clear, linkage facilitation is a term we basically invented to encompass all different kinds of these connector roles whose job it is to help people successfully transition from one system of care to another. And so it's a generic umbrella term that encompasses a lot of variation, which you'll hear about today. You know these linkage facilitators by a number of more familiar names. You might call them peer support specialists or patient navigators or community health workers or recovery case managers. All of these are different titles, and those titles are necessary because these roles are all just a little bit different from each other, right? So they may or may not be peers, they may or may not be paid, they may be employed by the justice system or by a treatment provider or by a community-based organization. And so within JCOIN, while each of these research teams has been conducting their projects with their specific type of connector, they have also been working together across these projects and even across initiatives to try to understand what generalizable lessons we are learning about linkage facilitation generally, and whether the differences between these roles matter in terms of patient experiences and patient outcomes. So today you're going to hear from those 6 JCOIN trials that Lynn mentioned, with a promise from us that there is more to come as these trials conclude over the next 12 months or so. I won't rush things along, but we're really looking forward to today. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn this over to our speakers for today.
Thanks, Lori. So our first speaker today is Christine Grella, followed by John Palmer. Thank you. We could get the slides.
Thank you, Lori, for that overview and context of JCOIN. And I think there's a prior slide. And Lynn and Julia for all your help in setting this up. So today we'll be presenting on the linkage facilitation intervention that we're doing in the Chestnut Hub. Our study aims to improve retention across the OUD service cascade following reentry from jail. So next slide, please. So as Lori mentioned, there's different types of intervention models. Linkage facilitation, ours is the recovery management checkup model. It's based on a chronic disease management approach. So as we all know, the analogies to hypertension and diabetes, where you don't go in for one shot of treatment, but you have ongoing monitoring, we adopted that same approach to treating substance use disorders. Our approach relies on a consistent interaction with our participants. It's very much tailored to their needs. And our focus is long-term. Our studies, we've had 6 prior clinical trials, including the current one in the field, have ranged from 12 to 48 months of ongoing intervention. In JCOIN, we're doing 24 months. The premise is to intervene as early as possible to detect signs of need for treatment and relapse, shorten the time to treatment entry and reentry as needed, and ultimately to improve long-term outcomes. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have a foundation of prior research studies, clinical trials, and quasi-experimental. And across those trials, participants who received the RMC intervention were significantly more likely to enter treatment at all, spend more cumulative time in treatment, and return to treatment sooner as needed. Yet we identified from our prior studies that some folks have persistent substance use and need for treatment over time, even with our intervention. So we developed and are testing in our JCOIN hub an adapted version of the RMC that provides a higher intensity intervention, more frequent meetings, more intense meetings. Participants in our study are recruited following discharge from jail, most of them from Cook County Jail in Chicago. Our focus again is on treatment, but in JCOIN it's focused on treatment with medications for OUD. And ultimately, as well as increasing treatment participation, of course, we aim to reduce the risk of opioid-related overdose and mortality. Next slide, please. So to describe the intervention, and what we hope today is to convey to you what the RMC intervention is, we have developed an acronym that distills the key components. So you can see lift up. Linkage managers are critical. They use inspirational and motivational techniques. A key element is follow-up through regular checkups. Treatment connections are well established and utilized by the linkage managers. Ongoing and unwavering support over time and proactive relinkage to treatment as needed. So we thought the best way to illustrate what we mean by RMC and how these elements are put into practice is through walking through a case study. So I'm going to move to the next slide and hand it over to my colleague, John Palmer, who is our lead linkage manager at our Chestnut Hub.
Hey, thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to try to summarize 2 years of working with someone in 5 minutes, but here we go. So the case study we're going to use today is Joe. He's a client of mine, one of the first that I interacted with when the study started. He's a 64-year-old African-American male. He's been back and forth between homelessness, unhousing, streets, his parents, couch surfing. He's been all over the place. He's got 30+ years of heroin and cocaine use, and as well as other things, alcohol, marijuana, stuff like that. And he's got a long history in and out of treatment, in and out of jails and institutions. And along with that, petty crimes, is things that go along with, using on the street level. So Linkage, so our main goal is to be that conduit to treatment services and to provide that extra level of support. So for Joe, he came to a lighthouse for this project, really wanting 2 things is what at the beginning. 1 was to be employable, and 2 was to stop disappearing from his family, his mom specifically. But he had zero idea how to do that, being in substance use for 30+ years. So prior to his meeting with me, he does a quick assessment that kind of summarizes the using part of, his story, as well as some social support, things like that. So I get that information, condensed to have my linkage meeting with him. So, so Joe, we inspire through motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is a technique that helps, assist with the motivations for change, right? So, with Joe, his behavior was related to substance use, and he really had no idea how to get out of it. He was stuck, for lack of a better word. So we're trained in motivational interviewing. We work with a very great trainer who's constantly refreshing us with motivational skills. MI is very centered on the MI spirit, compassion, acceptance, partnership, and evocation. And so with Joe, we kind of clicked right off the start. But having MI as my main tool was super important for helping him, see what he can do. So we follow up. So follow-ups, regular checkups are twofold. So Joe never missed a single appointment with me over 2 years, which is pretty impressive. It's monthly check-ins we did, not to mention, intermediate phone conversations, texting, whatever. So Joe, these follow-ups, we let the client know that we are there for them regardless, and that we go out of our way to make that contact, whether it's social media, phone, text, email, outreach workers, whatever it takes to find and connect with our clients. That's what we do. And the second part is through these regular checkups, us as linkage managers get to follow along on the journey of our clients, right? So Joe, needed to be relinked to treatment several times. I linked him to methadone. He would go for a while, he would fall out, he would go back, we'd assist them with paperwork, transportation, all these little things that are barriers for a lot of our participants. We assisted with all of that to make it as easy and seamless to get into and connect with the treatment agency. So about the 4th or 5th time, Joe finally, through our meetings, decided that he wanted to try inpatient, detox and inpatient, because the methadone clinic wasn't necessarily working for him at that time. So we connected him to detox. He went from medical detox to inpatient treatment for 28 days. And during that time, Joe made the decision to switch to Suboxone. So up to this point, Joe was learning how to empower himself. Joe was learning how to become and speak for what he needs, advocate for himself, all these different things that he wasn't necessarily, he was always able to, he just wasn't necessarily knowing how to do it, right? So that's where a linkage manager comes in to help with all that stuff. So in Chicago, we're connected to many, many, many treatment agencies. 2 of the biggest in our area, Family Guidance for, mood treatment, and Haymarket, which is, for inpatient, things like that, as well as many other smaller facilities. So, we're really connected. So we have that easy access, to treatment for our participants. So with that being said, what is unwavering support? Yeah, that's the thing. 2 years is by far the longest intervention I've ever been involved with, and I've been in this field for a minute. And over that course, through the partnerships of MI and the MI spirit that we established earlier on, Joe was able to trust in someone else, that he may not have been, he, wasn't necessarily having trust issues, but, he didn't know how to have like a positive relationship because his situation was filled with, things that happen on the streets and all that stuff. So the unwavering support and, rehashing the goals that Joe, set for himself at the beginning, just being employable and being able to take care of his mom, who took care of him for so long. So, like I mentioned, I linked Joe several times. He made the decision to finally go on Suboxone. And to this day, he's still taking Suboxone. Now, the proactive part of our thing is we can always treat. I mean, clients need to know they can always go back to treatment unless barring anything major. So, Joe was able to know that he could just go back if he needed to go back. There's no such thing as failure, just try again kind of thing. As we all know, this thing is the substance use is not easy, right? So it doesn't click on the first try. So Joe, made that decision to switch to Suboxone, and through that, he still reported some use, but he reported using so much less than he ever, over the 30 years. So it's harm reduction, at the very least, which is a huge thing for Joe. Joe also was diagnosed with a very serious health issue towards the end of our time together. But he didn't let that deter his goals, and through that, he was able to connect to his mom again and connect with his mom who needed his support. I had the opportunity to speak with her a couple of times. The first time, way at the beginning, she was like, I don't know what to do with this boy, that kind of thing. And then by the end, she was like, I got my son back. And so if anything, the power of what we do in this whole project just allows for not only us to connect with others, but for others to connect back into their lives, right? Joe was able to do that regardless of anything that was in his way. So that's really it. I mean, that's quick in a nutshell, but that's how we do it here in Chicago, Linkage Managers. So thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Christine and John. I really appreciate it. Okay. Oh, good. Contact information. Wonderful. Our next presenter is Martha Tilson from Kentucky. Martha.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Lynn. I'll say it's an honor to present today on behalf of our Kentucky research team, especially our partners who are responsible for providing our peer-delivered linkage facilitation intervention. I'll share that I myself am a scientist, but I'm also a person in recovery from opioid use and other substances. So having the privilege to do this important work alongside our amazing peer specialists has meant so much to me, and I am very excited to share that work with you all today. Next slide. I'll just give a quick acknowledgement of our JCOIN funding and disclaimer about the contents of this presentation. I would also like to disclose that one of the presentation's co-authors, Amanda Fallon-Bennett, is a co-founder of Voices of Hope, which is the recovery community organization contracted to provide the peer navigation services. Next slide. All right, as a roadmap for what I would like to share during our very brief time today, I'm going to be providing an overview of the Kentucky JCOIN peer navigation intervention. And then I'm going to be shifting gears to share some of the perspectives of our peer navigators, who are really the real experts here, talking about some challenges of the Kentucky JCOIN approach, what has worked well, and next steps for research and practice. Next slide. All right, let's start with a 10,000-foot overview of our Kentucky JCOIN peer navigation intervention. Many of you may not know this, but Kentucky is actually the only JCOIN hub to focus exclusively on women who have been uniquely impacted by the opioid crisis and have faced rising rates of incarceration. And our intervention has two arms, and one of those arms does include peer navigation, so women are randomized to receive that or not, with the overall goal of both arms being linkage to OUD treatment, especially medications for opioid use disorder like buprenorphine, methadone, or naltrexone. And as I mentioned, our research team partners with a local Kentucky recovery community organization called Voices of Hope. And specifically, the JCOIN grant funding supports 2 certified peer support specialists, both of whom are women that have relevant lived experiences that they share with our participants. Next slide. I do want to take a moment to celebrate this partnership, which makes all of this possible. If you want to scan that QR code, that will take you to Voices of Hope's website. And there you can see everything that they offer to our community in addition to the work that they do with us through our Kentucky JCOIN partnership. Almost all of the services and supports offered through JCOIN are remote, but I share this because this is the context in which our peers got trained. It's where their day-to-day is, where they work, where they get supervised. And I know that that environment and that infrastructure has really contributed to the wealth of expertise and experience that they bring to the table. Next slide. So let's get into it. What does this intervention actually look like? So the intervention actually starts before jail release with an introductory telehealth session while the participant is still incarcerated. This happens via video conference. And we schedule these sessions about 7 to 60 days before anticipated release. And the session with the peer navigator includes assessment of things like recovery capital, talking to women about any challenges or supports that they anticipate in the community after release, and then talking to women about what their goals after jail would look like. Now, the intervention is really set up to be a bridge to the community, that linkage component. So it also continues post-jail release when peers are notified by the research team that participants have gotten out. And at that point, they start to track and locate participants in the community with the goal of providing 12 weeks of navigation to treatment and recovery support with at least weekly contact with participants. And then after the 12-week intervention period, if participants think this is awesome and really helpful, they do have the option to sign up for free ongoing recovery support services at that time. Next slide. All right, at this point, just to share an update, we've completed our baseline enrollment. That was back in January. As of now, we've had about 94% of our peer navigation participants get released to the community and kind of cycle through this intervention. So we thought this would really be an ideal time to sit down with the peer support staff and see what they thought about the Kentucky JCOIN approach, what has been difficult, what's worked well, and what we should all be doing next. Next slide. All right, let's start with some challenges. Jails themselves can be hectic environments. I'll just be real about that, which made it hard at times to even make the initial telehealth sessions happen while women were still incarcerated. Like sometimes there just wasn't the space or the staff available to make it come together. And then when it did come together, though, peers really wanted to make plans with participants for after jail release, but this didn't really end up being feasible most of the time because jail releases are also really difficult to predict from a timing sense, but also with location, because after jail release, women could really go anywhere, which made it really hard to set up like concrete resource plans and treatment linkages in the community. Participants were also sometimes hard to reach in the community as well, especially because peers, if you remember, were providing all of these supports from one centralized location here in Kentucky, which expanded their reach across the state, which is a benefit, but it also limited their options to track participants down. And this remote approach also made it difficult sometimes to support participants who are facing significant resource insecurities, especially when we're thinking about rural areas. Like when you're on the other side of the state, what do you do for a rural participant who has no transportation and has no food? Or someone who gets released with only one set of clothes that doesn't even fit anymore. I will give our peers credit for being super creative to find solutions to issues like this, but at the end of the day, it can still be incredibly frustrating. Next slide. On the other hand, there were a number of aspects of the Kentucky JCOIN approach that did work really well. Shared lived experience is such an important part of these connections between peers and participants, and I think especially so given our population as women, who so often have histories of trauma and mental health issues, difficult relationships with family and children. So having someone that cared from that place of understanding was really especially valuable. And even more so because peers would reach out consistently every week and persistently, even when participants were unresponsive. And I know this made a big difference because a lot of our women had shared that they were really used to people kind of giving up on them. Our peers also figured out a workaround to the challenge of providing remote supports by scheduling what we called resource gathering trips to the Kentucky counties where jails were located. So they would travel to each county for a few days, visit treatment providers, recovery residences, community action programs, go to meetings, and like get phone numbers and contacts for people in those communities. And this really helped them learn so much about what was available and understand even more about like, what would I as a woman in recovery be comfortable going to here? What would I recommend? Peers also started using a study Facebook account to maintain contact with participants through Messenger, which was really helpful when women would change phone numbers and move around or drop out of contact with friends and family. Really helps get around some of the challenges of remote tracking and locating those hard to reach participants. And then another advantage I really want to highlight is having the peers embedded in this larger research team. I had the pleasure of facilitating weekly meetings where the peers and their supervisor would attend along with our research staff. And we would all talk about challenges and successes and how things were going. And I know for our staff, it was really eye-opening and inspiring to hear the peers talk about their work. And I hope for the peers also, it was exciting to see how their services were part of this bigger picture. And one final thing that peers mentioned as a positive for the Kentucky JCOIN approach is really the benefit to them, the peers, which I think is a huge one. So being able to meet women at this very challenging point in their lives when they're sitting in jail, thinking about getting out, struggling with opioid use and other substances, and this being a point where the peers have been themselves personally, when peers saw women succeed after that, like getting to see their grandkids or celebrating recovery milestones or completing a peer support certification that they were inspired by their peer to do, our peers on JCOIN just talked about this as hugely rewarding. So I really want to highlight that. Next slide. All right, I'm going to end here with a few thoughts from our peers about next steps for peer supports and linkage facilitation, both in research and practice. So one comment from our peers was to hire peers and place peers in more different settings in the community, which can expand the reach of peers to people who could benefit from recovery supports and service linkages, especially if we think creatively about this, like embedding peers in resource centers, helping with basic needs, not necessarily specific to clients with substance use issues, but places where those folks might show up. Not only would this expand the reach of peers, but it also provides more opportunities for exposure to people working as peer supports. This gives people more chances to start engaging in services and thinking about recovery, but it also gives people more examples of what recovery can look like, who recovers, how they recover, what do they do in recovery, which means that they're more likely to see themselves there too eventually. And lastly, it gives folks more hope for jobs and careers that celebrate lived experience, which can be a really powerful motivator to move the needle towards recovery, knowing what's possible on the other side. Next slide. Our peers also mentioned the value of integrating peers in criminal legal system contexts, including with court systems, so peers could better advocate for participants and be involved in that pre-release planning. Taking some of the unpredictability out of this, especially if peers could have face-to-face contacts instead of only virtual. And then not only could peers potentially help folks navigate challenging relationships like with POs, I think it's also possible that their presence in this system could help reduce stigma just by being living examples of professionals in recovery. And lastly, our peers talked about the need for work to determine how to best measure success of peer support. Obviously, with lots of interventions, we want to see linkages to treatment and reduce substance use, but I think it's important to remember that that might not be what the participant is really interested in, or even what's feasible based on where they're at. So instead, our peers recommended that we should also consider more global outcomes like stigma or social support that would be likely results of receiving peer services, kind of regardless of a participant's goals or means. Next slide. All right, with that, I will close. Please feel free to take a picture of my email, reach out if you have further questions. You can also scan that QR code if you like to read an open access article about our peer intervention. Thank you so much for your time today.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. As the other presenters said, I'm really glad to be here to be able to share some of the things that we've learned in the Reducing Opioid Mortality in Illinois, or the ROMI study that is being conducted out of the University of Chicago. Next slide, please. I'm going to start with just a brief overview of what the study looks like. So really what we're trying to assess is, can a paired case manager and peer recovery coach intervention engage individuals re-entering community from criminal legal contexts into substance use disorder treatment or continuation of substance use treatment if they initiated while they were incarcerated. So our study has two arms, the CM and PRC arm that also includes harm reduction services, including naloxone linkage to existing harm reduction services in the area, And then we have our other arm that includes OEND, so overdose education, naloxone distribution, comprehensive resource packets around local services, etc. So our study is conducted at 4 sites throughout the state of Illinois. So we're in Cook County, which is an urban setting, but we're also in rural and kind of suburban settings throughout the state. To be eligible, folks just need to be over 18, have a history of substance use disorder with either opioids or stimulants, and had some interaction with the criminal legal system in the past 30 days. And study duration is 12 months. And then we are looking at a number of outcomes, but the primary one is MOUD treatment, engagement, and retention upon release, but also looking at things like rearrest, insurance enrollment, mental health service engagement, a big continuum of harm reduction activities. As Dr. Tilson said, not everybody is ready for treatment, and we wanted to capture those folks who are making positive changes in their substance use or adopting harm reduction behaviors as outcomes as well. Next slide. So the way we address the fact that our hub is in Chicago, but our sites are throughout the state, is using a remote hub and spoke model. So we have research assistants that are throughout the state that are doing a warm handoff to our CM-PRC team. Most of the time, those handoffs are occurring while the person is still incarcerated, but we also do community recruitment as well. And this approach with the CM and PRC teams is holistic, locally tailored. So it's important to remember that these folks are living in the areas that they're providing the services. So they know the local context, they know the local service landscape. And then we take those folks and train them with a lot of different techniques to be able to provide comprehensive support to our participants, including motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, harm reduction, ethics, systems navigation, etc. And the reason that we have 2 roles is because we know that in the field, in real life, often peer support folks are doing case management, doing a little bit of everything. So we wanted to separate out those roles. So our case managers really work on linkages to care, support, referrals, assistance with filling out applications, et cetera, which allows our peers to really provide that psychosocial recovery support grounded in their local lived experience. And this diagram over here just shows that we tailor the level of the intervention to kind of a couple things, both where they are in their release trajectory. So using a kind of a modified critical time intervention, we know that people post-release usually need the most services. So the hope is that as they move their way through the program, that they will be able to do more things on their own and require less support. Next slide. Okay. So one of the things that we recognized pretty early on about this model is, one, we're not in the same place. So that presents a challenge, but also that this work is really difficult. It's difficult to provide support as a peer. That can cause issues to one's own recovery. And we wanted to figure out a comprehensive way to support our linkage facilitators in their work. So we have a 2-pronged approach with that. So we have weekly individual clinical supervision and bi-monthly group case consultations. So the individual clinical supervision is really a space for staff to talk about whatever they want to, whether it's their work, their own personal well-being, their own personal recovery, whatever that ends up being challenges of the work, including self-care, boundary maintenance, challenges to recovery, as I said. And this also provides an opportunity to assess ongoing fidelity to the core intervention components. And then we have our group consultation, which again is the entire group gets together. Again, this is all virtually over Zoom, and it allows them to bounce ideas off of each other, reflect on the work that they're doing, maybe the differences between what that work looks like in the different sites, how they've addressed certain issues. It's case-based often, so they're discussing specific examples, but they also will discuss articles or resources, team building, etc. And then we've added additional trainings in there to address things like dynamic changes in the drug supply, like xylazine, etc. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick illustration of what are these topics that are discussed, and kind of you can see that some of the more relational aspects of things are more discussed in the individual consultation, and the more linkage, harm reduction, ongoing training, etc., was much more discussed in our biweekly group consultations. So it was interesting to see kind of which topics were more discussed in each setting. Next slide. And again, we also did this process of kind of going back to staff and asking them what's working about this approach that we're taking, what's not, what do we want to see in the future? So what they identified as working well is we had a very comprehensive, strong foundational training that took about 2 months to complete, and gave them a variety of skills, but also, you know, they found it helpful to have this on the job learning, and in conjunction with that, the space to kind of discuss what that learning looked like, what are the challenges that come up as they're learning how to do these things and implementing them in the real world. Every staff we've had has said that the individual supervision with our amazing clinical supervisor has really allowed them to stay in this work and not burn out and not have challenges, and has been really invaluable. Particularly the relational aspect of supervision, and the ability to focus strictly on their primary role rather than trying to do everything. And then the group supervision, they say fosters team cohesiveness. I've been amazed at how much of a community we've been able to build as a study remotely. You know, we're very rarely all in the same room together, but the camaraderie and support has been really amazing. And a lot of that is due to our clinical supervisor, as well as our amazing staff. Okay. And you can see, obviously, there's some quotes here from our staff about their thoughts as well. Next slide. What are some of the challenges? So stigma is an ongoing challenge. I'm sure it's a challenge for all of us. And as well as in the criminal legal system, in the community, in the various settings that people are showing up in and working within. There was a lot of site level differences between the criminal legal settings that we were in. Some people were being held in jail for very long periods of time, so we could develop those long-term relationships before release. Some folks were being released from Illinois Department of Correction like that day. So there was a lot of difference between the sites and in terms of how that was operating. Obviously, recruitment and retention of long-term over 12 months is a challenge. And then we had this unique event that happened in Illinois where we had cash bail reform, and we're still trying to figure out kind of, we're now 1 year into that and still seeing the effects of that. The main one being less people are sitting in jail, which is great, but we had to kind of adapt to how we were going to be recruiting folks. And then the lack of local resources, research structure versus real world setting. This work takes a long time to build up that rapport, and people don't always have that. Sometimes they wait till month 11 to engage, things like that. So there's a lot of challenges that come with having a time limited intervention. Next slide. And then the last thing is what they identified as kind of future directions. Again, as the Kentucky Hub noted, having peers and linkage facilitators in more settings, including the criminal legal system, court settings, better access to correctional facilities for folks in these positions, better relationships with stakeholders in the community. And then that this should just kind of be standard in more supportive settings, given the value that it has for people who use drugs. And then further professionalization of especially peer recovery coaches, giving them more opportunities to advance in their careers and more professional pathways. Last slide. And when I do these presentations, I always like to at least remember we had 2 linkage facilitators that passed away during the course of this study, Floyd McGee and Dr. Modena Stinnett, and we dedicate this to them and continue on in their memory, and they are very, very missed. So thank you.
All right. So thank you for that, Maggie. And I didn't get a chance to also thank Martha earlier. So thanks to both of you. The The next presentation is Dr. Anthony Kotzer-Liversage and Machisti Rankin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. For this presentation, Machisti and I will really be talking about the peer study by the Brown University Hub, which is a hybrid implementation study that initially uses local change teams to create a systems level change, followed by the utilization of peer support specialists as linkage facilitators that support the connection between the community supervision system and then the treatment system. Next slide, please. Okay, the key components of the peer study and the Brown University's hub and its approach to linkage facilitation really is centered on the peer support specialists who really work with the individuals that are in probation and have a lived experience with opioid use disorders. Now, what we are doing is conducting a randomized experiment where eligible participants are consented and then assigned with one of the two groups, either receiving a peer support specialist or treatment as usual. The project spans multiple sites. You have sites in Rhode Island, Brunswick County in North Carolina, Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, with about a target of about 450 participants in total. The primary focus that we are looking at in the study is the linkage of participants to medications for opioid use disorder and other treatment services. We collect data at the baseline, at the 3 months and 6 months time points to really assess the key outcome measures, and including in terms of the engagement that the participants have with MOUD, opioid and other drug use, and the rates of the rearrest and any probation violations. These outcomes really are critical for us in determining the effectiveness of the peer support specialists in enhancing the recovery for this population. Next slide. If we take a closer look at the role of the peer support specialists in the study, each site has 2 certified peer support specialists who really bring value because of their lived experience with opioid use disorders, as well as criminal justice setting lived experience. Now, this means that they have their direct experience of community supervision and prior treatment experiences as well. So this background really allows them to effectively engage with the participants that they have been recruiting and in order to try to support them. This relationship that they have between the peer and the actual client really is supported by a very collaborative and flexible approach that they have to this relationship. And this really ensures that they have a very person-centered, personalized and responsive approach to the person's needs. Now, this means that the linkage activity focuses on rather a targeted navigation, offering ad hoc services where necessary and as necessary as they can connect with their clients. Now, this is delivered in both in-person or digitally or through synchronous methods. So there is different ways that they are able to connect with their clients to ensure that they are available. And this dual approach really allows for that assertive, proactive linkage where needed, as well as that passive engagement depending on the client's circumstances. Ultimately, what we're seeing is that their primary goal is to link clients to medications for OUD, while also connecting them to the essential services and supports needed that is unique to them. Now, in this slide, you'll see the different headings. This is all connects to a later presentation that I'll be speaking that is connected to a typology of linkage facilitation. Now, could I speak? You have the next slide, please. Now, the actual role of peer support specialists in the study, it was guided by SAMHSA's 4 competencies for peer support specialists. It really gives this solid framework on how to approach doing the work. Now, this relationship for the peers begins with the initial meetings to establish rapport, and then is established through the development of personalized recovery plans that utilize a wellness recovery tool. The peer support specialists also then help the clients reflect on both challenges and successes they have had while on probation. A key part of this approach involves using motivation interviewing skills to support clients in identifying their own recovery goals that they are trying to reach. When needed, the peer support specialists can then review court or community supervision stipulations and expectations to ensure that clients stay on track while trying to achieve those goals. And a critical role that they have is also in assisting clients with linkage to medications such as the MOUD while providing that recovery support. Now, how that actually looks in terms of maintaining fidelity, if I can have the next slide. Thank you, is to ensure that we promoted fidelity to the peer support specialists. We looked at this, it becomes a critical component of how we deliver this program. Now, to maintain the consistency, we developed a peer support protocol manual that everyone was trained on and able to utilize. The peers utilized an activity log to keep track of what they were doing, and that they then reviewed regularly. Then oversight is also provided by a dedicated supervisor. Then each site has a cross-site peer supervisor to ensure coordination across the different locations, with regular meetings with all the peer support specialists from each site to help troubleshoot any challenges and come up with strategies and ways to celebrate the success and overcome those challenges. Also, these meetings also offered a vital support to peers in maintaining their own long-term recovery, which is a core component of peer support specialists and is often overlooked. At this point, I will hand over to Machisti, who's very much more intimately involved with actually the implementation by the peers. So I'll let him take over from the slides from here.
Thank you, Anthony, and good afternoon, everyone. Could we bring up my slide, please? Go back up forward, I'm sorry. Right there. So we talk about patience versus persistence. And when we're reaching out to clients, we want to try and be patient with them and balance that with persistence in trying to reach them. Oftentimes what happens is you call a person too often, they disengage because they feel like you're chasing them down. And it's a sign. If I'm not answering my phone, I'm not interested. Give me a little space, I might re-engage, or I may not, but it's my choice. And we often forget that no matter what we're doing, engagement is about choice, right? We have to empower people to make choices, whether they are positive ones in our minds or negative ones for them. Empowerment is a huge factor. We want to make sure that people rely on themselves and move away from their reliance on substances or whatever things that they may be using to dampen the traumas that they've suffered from their childhood or adulthood, right? So oftentimes when I'm working with a client, I won't tell them I'm proud of them. I want them to be proud of themselves and their achievements. I want them to focus on inner strength. And once that inner strength comes out, they can then find that acceptance and validation in the things that they do within themselves and then see that from others. Hard truths, balance. Oftentimes people need to hear things that they don't want to hear. We sometimes as peers get caught up in trying to help. And when we do that, sometimes we massage the ego of the individuals with whom we're working and not give them authentic feedback that can be beneficial to them. Sometimes I've had clients that have not liked what I've had to tell them in a particular space, but after some time, they've come back and said, you know what? I really appreciated what you said. I needed to hear that, but I wasn't ready to. And it's not about trying to harm a person or hurt them. It's about trying to encourage them to see the truth. One of the things we need to look at in our recovery is truth and the value of that to be able to move forward authentically. Marathon versus sprint, as has been brought up and is thematic in this discussion, we're often asking people to move rapidly through a process to get to a particular goal. And if you're discussing traumas, repeatedly discussing those traumas, especially in the space of substance use disorder, doesn't create a space for a person to walk away. It actually will direct them more towards using. I'm sure that there are others on this call who have spoken to individuals who said, after talking about that, I wanted to go get high. So what we want to constantly bring up what it was that hurt them. We want to try and direct things away from that. Hey, what was the last good movie you saw? Hey, have you checked out that sandwich spot in the neighborhood lately? We want to make people aware that recovery is not about a imaginary clock that's ticking in their head. How many minutes, seconds, hours has it been since you last used? It's a totality of recovery. Are you enjoying your life? Because if you're not engaging in the other aspects of life, you're just existing. You're not actually in recovery. And finally, I'll move to the challenges. The challenges for consistent engagement that I have seen have been trust. Building trust takes time. You wouldn't leave your small child, if you have children, with someone you just met. You wouldn't walk into a room and start telling everyone in your job the first day all of your deepest secrets. You would begin to develop trust with people, and that takes time. So when we're working with our clients, we have to recognize their trauma histories. As people in recovery, we recognize our trauma histories. And as we want we want the grace to be given that time to give trust, we want to extend that to the folks with whom we're working. Also, people are engaged in other supports. Sometimes they have therapists and other organizations with whom they're working, so they may not call you, or they may not be as fully engaged as you may like, right? Also, other responsibilities, children, jobs, things of that nature. So we want to make sure that they're living a full life and not focused on us. Here in Rhode Island, felonies take about 10 years to be removed or to be eligible for expungement from your record. So that's a huge barrier for that full engagement piece, because a lot of the clients with whom I'm working, they can't find gainful employment. They're relegated to the food, the filth, the flowers, those things that won't pay you well and don't require a lot of education, and kind of put you in a stagnant space. And dosing centers are often in areas that present a lot of challenges for our folks, as far as transportation and dodging the minefield of other drugs that are present, right? If you're going into a place to get your dose and you have to dodge several other individuals who are offering you drugs or substances, it makes it difficult for you to make it to that destination to get treatment. And if you're in early recovery, it's a really difficult space that we don't really want to put people in. Lastly, I think it's just important to recognize that at the end of the day, it's about choice. And whether a client chooses to engage or chooses not to engage, it's not about us. It's not about taking things personally. It's about recognizing that they have to make a choice for themselves and for their lives. Thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony and Machisti. I'd like to do a little quick check-in on time. Are we okay with time? Not hearing anything else. I will take that as we're good with time for now. So thanks. I'd like to introduce Darrell Clayton of the Yale Hub. So thank you, Darrell. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Linda. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to present today, as well as be a part of this phenomenal work. I am presenting on the TCN Hub. Our goal is to engage individuals in care post-release, implementing the TCN program to improve MOUD continuity. Next slide, please. Again, my name is Darrell Clayton. I am a certified community health worker, as well as certified peer support specialist and facilitator of both. My role at TCN Pass is the lead trainer. Next slide, please. This is a photo of our team. We all met in New Orleans to discuss next steps, discuss data collection, discuss strategies to move forward. And I just wanted to show those lovely faces. I'm just speaking today, but this is the heart of our team. Next slide, please. An overview of our TCN Paths. The hypothesis is the TCN program participation improves measures within the opioid treatment cascade among those just released from jails on medications for OUD. We had two arms. One was a treatment arm where the Transitions Clinic Network model was implemented, and the other arm was standard primary care. Study sites, we had 5: Connecticut, Minnesota, New York, North Carolina, and Puerto Rico. We had several assessments. After the baseline, there was a 3-month assessment follow-up, then 6-month, 9-month, and then of course a 12-month assessment, so that we stayed connected and evaluated as things changed. Enrollment was conducted in the community, and our target enrollment was 400 participants. Aim 1 outcome was primary care engagement and MOUD engagement and retention. Aim 2 outcome was TCN cost effectiveness versus standard primary care. And aim 3 outcomes was acceptability and appropriateness of TCN. Next slide. TCN Paths Linkage Facilitator approach. Our approach was the TCN Paths employs community health workers with lived experience of incarceration. Community health workers were integrated into primary care teams to support the health and well-being of individuals returning from incarceration. Patients with OUD were randomized into the 2 arms I spoke about. One was the TCN arm, and the other was standard primary care at the 5 sites for continuity of care. Next slide. What worked well? Well, TCN CHWs act as cultural interpreters, navigators, and mentors who facilitate trust and engagement in health systems, which patients may understandably fear or mistrust. By being integrated into primary care teams, TCN CHWs are able to help patients with OUD address their physical, mental health, and reentry needs. TCN trains individual community health workers in core competencies of working as part of a primary care team and serving individuals impacted by incarceration. And TCN also trains and supports transformation among health systems to support these CHWs and patients we serve. Next slide. The unique approach of the TCN CHWs, again, that lived experience is so valuable. When a person returns from incarceration, there are so many barriers that they face, and they'll put their chronic illness, including MOUD, on the back burner. So we are role models, which means the TCN CHWs serve as powerful role models, demonstrating that recovery and integration to society is possible. That's motivation and hope. CHWs are credible messengers and inspire hope and motivation by sharing their own stories of overcoming similar challenges. There's a shared understanding of incarceration. CHWs understand the culture and shared experiences of those who've been incarcerated, allowing for more effective communication and tailored interventions. There's comprehensive care. CHWs adopt a holistic approach, addressing not just OUD, but other aspects of health and well-being. And of course, documentation. CHWs use outreach to keep participants engaged while tracking and documenting consistently. Next slide, please. We had additional sessions to support our CHWs, dealing with patient ambivalence, helping people with time management, dealing with probation and parole, creating boundaries, partnering with jail staff, and dealing with self-stigma with patients. And that's just a photo of us online from the 5 sites, all sharpening iron. Next slide, please. We did have challenges. One was lack of sustainability, of sustainable funding for CHW role and the changing of supervisors. Then we had legal barriers to hiring, as well as accessing the jails with CHWs being justice involved. Stigma and discrimination related to SUD and carceral system involvement, lack of access to medical records for our patients, co-occurring mental health disorders, stigma from health systems, cultural and language barriers. And when the CHW was not the person who initiated the contact, it changed the rapport building process for community health workers when they did meet the patients. Next slide, please. What's next in the field for TCN Paths is, of course, the 1115 Medicaid reentry waiver. This will give us the potential to expand the workforce in care and SUD treatment for the population we serve. Community health worker certification is something that we're advocating for. Some states already have a state certification and some don't. So we're actively working to get folks certified and recognized with a credential in their state. And of course, the HRSA funding for reentry projects is also on our radar for next steps. Next slide, please. I'm not going to do a case study, but I do want to leave you with a quote from a TCN patient. They, meaning TCN or the transitions clinic staff, they don't judge you. They treat you like a human being, like you're still a person. That's something that prison takes away from you. And when you get out, society takes it away from you. I think that's what makes Transitions Clinic so successful. Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks a lot, Darrell. Our next presentation is Dr. Springer and Stasia Stuccio of the Yale HIV Hub.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to try to briefly speak so that I can leave Stasia some time to really talk about her personal experience. So I'm an infectious disease and addiction medicine physician and one of the 3 PIs on this project. And just to give you a heads up, it's a little different than the other JCOIN projects. It's specifically looking at how to assist with HIV prevention and treatment along with substance use disorder treatment for justice-involved individuals. And it's specifically evaluating 2 linkage facilitation components, but really a patient navigator, as I'll describe, and a mobile health unit, one-stop shop service provision that includes on the mobile health units community health workers. So I'll be talking briefly about both of those linkage aspects. So next slide, please. So this is just the overview. Our study is called Action, Addressing Risk Through Community Treatment for Infectious Disease and Opioid Use Disorder Now Among Justice-Involved Populations. We're actually in 4 sites. 2 are in Texas, one at Tarrant County with TCU, and in the other in Dallas County in Texas with UT Southwestern. And then we're in what we call 2 sites in Connecticut, but really it spans 6 of the 8 counties in Connecticut. And we divide them up based on the Northeast and the Southeast. And then this is like a type 1, as we described, hybrid implementation effectiveness trial. But it's basically what we're doing is we're individuals who have a history of opioid and or stimulant use, doesn't have to have use disorder, who are at risk or and living with HIV. And they can be involved currently in the justice, criminal legal system, so currently incarcerated, but they also could be individuals who are in the community and have had potential criminal legal involvement, including parole, probation, and other services. And then they are randomized 1-to-1 to either receiving an individual patient navigator, who could be a peer or a near peer, who links them to the actual services that are available in the community. And then, or they get randomized to a mobile health unit. And in this situation, mobile health units in Connecticut actually go to where they live and then provide clinical care, as well as have a community health worker. And Stasia is one of those community health workers in Connecticut. And they help with also follow up in the community with social services and other services. And then we're following them for a total of 12 months, the 6-month intervention period. And there's a whole host of outcomes being evaluated, but the primary outcome is the time to either pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP to prevent HIV, or antiretroviral therapy if they do have HIV. And the secondary outcomes are everything, including access to medication treatment for opioid use disorder, if they have opioid use disorder, stimulant use disorder treatments in the community, hepatitis C, everybody gets hepatitis C, HIV rapid testing, hepatitis C treatment. They also get bacterial STI treatments, testing gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. So we look at what assessment of that, as well as hepatitis B testing, and then a whole host of other outcomes. And then you'll see on the other side is we're doing implementation evaluation concurrently along with that. Next slide, please. So this is the span of the patient navigators and the community health workers across the Connecticut sites as well as the 2 Texas sites. And you can see there's a variety of individuals, and they span different forms of experience and exposures, and it's just been wonderful. And we unfortunately didn't have time to include everybody in this session, but just to let you know that it's quite broad. Next slide. So this is just to show you what happens at baseline. Individuals can be recruited while they're currently incarcerated in prison or jail, or in a supervised setting, substance use treatment program, et cetera, or in the community. Every single person goes through a very detailed needs assessment. And this includes the peer patient navigators as well as with the community health workers. And they work with the individuals to rank what are the needs that they have. And then as they go forward, looking at progress that is occurring with those actual needs. And you can see the needs are beyond biomedical needs, right? PrEP or ART, MOUD, all the other needs. And next slide. And this is just a schematic of what a patient navigator visit might include. That person goes through, and in the bottom, you can see maybe meeting at the baseline on the green. And then you can see the visits are structured to at least occur at least once a week for the first 4 weeks, but that can include as many visits as they want. So if they needed to meet 2 times or 3 times, and that could include via telephone, in person, and you can see continues to span throughout the 6 months. But the timing is going to be dependent on what the person requires. And then you can see there's a whole host of other things, but really developing an action plan based on that original needs assessment and their SMART goals. Next slide. So the community health workers are on these mobile health units. So they're in the other arm. They're working with clinicians that are on the mobile health unit. And you can see that the variety one in on the top left is in Tarrant County. The one on the right is up in Connecticut. And they have 2 exam rooms and a bathroom, and there's space, and there's a driver, of course, and who also can help. And then the one on the bottom is the one in Dallas, and this is the Homes Project. So they were already available. They've been working for 30 years and really working with individuals across many backgrounds, but including those who are unhoused. And so they partner with UT Southwestern. Next. And so this is just to show you that our community health workers also have kind of a structured, similar to the patient navigators visit, and we're recording all of and capturing all this data, but includes similar aspects of utilizing the needs assessment and helping individuals receive what they want. And then we want to also track that and how many encounters they may need. So this is important because the mobile health units for the Connecticut and the TCU site actually go to where people live. So if a person is unhoused, they bring the unit to where they are. If they are in a halfway house setting or wherever, go to where they are and what is it that they need. And that takes a lot of time, and we could go into a whole other issue about mobile health units, but next slide. And then this is, I was just going to show you can click both, if you can click again, all the way through. Yeah, so this was the first 361 participants. We have about 600 participants right now. And I just wanted to show you, in red is Texas and Connecticut is blue. But if you look at all of the needs that they have, and this has just come up on multiple other speakers have presented, is, okay, there are similarities. So we have a Medicaid expansion state, a non-Medicaid expansion state, different geographically, different politically, different, on and on and on. But the need, in many cases, the needs are the same. General medical care, dental care, health insurance, a bigger issue, right? In Texas, non-Medicaid expansion state than Connecticut, mental health care. And then if you look at those medical needs, so interests for PrEP or MOUD are lower. These other needs are superseding that. And then if you look at the socioeconomic needs, as this is going to come up, a form of personal identification and ID, absolutely critical to access some of the services, right, is a need across both sites. Communication issues, what does that mean? A cell phone, having an ability to talk to someone, to schedule a visit, actually using the phone also, we use it to get directions, all sorts of things. Similarities in the needs of that. Employment, the majority want a job, and but they have difficulty, it's been described, accessing that because of, and we've heard about the major issues. And then food, housing, transportation, absolutely critical. Next slide. So we have quotes from our patient navigators, and there's differences obviously in the Texas and Connecticut and access to services. And then we also have quotes from our other community health workers. But I really want to give time for Stasia, who is been a community health worker in Connecticut on the mobile health unit, and talking about what's worked well, what hasn't, what are some of the barriers and challenges, and a couple of success stories. So Stasia, feel free.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a really good overview of a lot of the barriers that our participants face. ID, phone access, those are the biggest ones that people will come to me with first. And I think when we're talking about successes in this work, we really have to look at how we're defining the term success. Ask that question. It's not always the measurable research outcomes that we're looking at that are the first things that I think of. It's all of these other achievements that are, I think, more important to our participants a lot of the time too. And I was working with someone who I really, really loved working with him. He would always come to his visit, talk about his daughter. And during one of our visits, I got him connected to medical care. I gave him a bus pass. I said, it's an all-day bus pass, but please just go to your appointment. And he, the next time I met with him, he was thanking me for giving him a bus pass and started crying and said, because I had transportation, not only was I able to go to my medical appointment, but I took the bus all day across the state. And I was able to wait outside my daughter's school and say, I have a surprise for you, come outside. And he was like, that's the first time I saw my daughter in, I don't even know how long. So those are the kinds of stories that I think I'm going to take away from this role. And if the only thing that we can do for someone is provide them with a safe space where they feel like they are seen and heard and valued as an individual, those are the things that I think are the greatest success in our work.
Thank you, Stasia. And the next slide, please. And these are, a summary of all our navigators and community health workers about things, and they've been echoing what a lot of people have said: building trust, having the flexibility and mobility to allow to actually really meet people where they are, not requiring them to come to us. And then, a lot of education, supporting each other, and connecting people to other services. And next slide, please. Challenges that have been identified, again, recidivism. The other big one is, like, we could have patients who want PrEP in Texas and there's non-Medicaid expansion state. They might want long-acting PrEP and they can't get it because they don't have insurance. Hard to contact people when you don't have a phone, right? And the affordable care provision of cell phones was taken away in April of this year. So really difficult. And then, a big thing about research, right? And it was already just the other person just talked about, is the time limit intervention funding is an issue. And so you might be just getting people all the support services you need, and then the intervention's done at 6 months. So really making sure people have that continuation in the community. And I'll end there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Springer and Stasia Stuccio. So our last presenter today is Dr. Anthony Kotzer-Liversage again on evaluating linkage facilitation. Go ahead, Anthony.
Okay, thank you so much. After listening to all the presentations, as you'll start to realize is that we have seen facilitation, across different sites by different people in different ways that it's delivered. So that becomes a question when we want to think about evaluation. So in this presentation, we're looking at both the taxonomy, which was a paper to establish some sort of common language and understanding, and then a checklist that we are looking at establishing for the measurement of what is actually happening. So if we change slides. Okay, the first one really is looking at, well, we wanted to establish a linkage facilitation checklist. Ultimately, this was really designed to try to capture the essential aspects of linkage facilitation. What actually transpires when we have either peer, the community health worker, i.e. the linkage facilitators, engaging in linkage facilitation. Now, That was because if we change the slides, you'll see in the middle of the slides there how each site has been approaching linkage facilitation in so many different nuanced ways. That creates a complexity of saying, well, we've got linkage facilitation. Even Laurie mentioned it when she introduced us, all of us at the beginning of this panel, that how do we actually go about this measurement when we really want to understand those essential aspects? So with those nuances, we decided that, okay, how can we gather all of us together to try to understand and develop and establish a checklist to do this? If we can shift to the next slide. What all the experts did in terms of the JCOIN across the different sites, when we got together, we established a linkage facilitation checklist. Now, here what we're doing is really looking at what are the site potential differences that we can expect in how we measure each of these different aspects. Now, when we're looking at these, we broke it down into multiple different scales. Now, these scales try to measure the different types of aspects in terms of personal experience, the training and usefulness of training, the type of communication and the communication and connection to local resources, what the activity support work. Now, what we've done is had a number of items and are actually working at trying to look at validating which other items ultimately will be dropped from the current list that we have at the moment. So we expect some to not really measure what we're hoping to. If we can move to the next slide. Now, as part of our process in doing this, I want to just delve a little bit into the actual findings that we have on the linkage facilitation checklist. Here, it's important to note that the findings we have currently is more preliminary and will provide some basic insights. Now, the insights we have been established from basically looking at data from up to wave 6. Now, this is one based on the 22nd of March of this year, and we will be collecting in more to then expand our analyses. Now, initially, we conducted surveys of linkage facilitators across four sites at baseline, followed by subsequent surveys every 3 months. Now, respondents were prompted to complete a web-based survey within a 2-week window, and this was really provided after receiving multiple reminders to actually complete that survey. At the outset, 30 linkage facilitators participated in the baseline survey. However, as time progressed, the number decreased to 15 at a 9-month mark due to turnover and attrition. These linkage facilitators held various different diverse jobs and titles, and the majority were employed full-time. Each linkage facilitator received weekly supervision and maintained at least weekly communication with their clients, providing ongoing support for up to 6 months. Now, so the question then really arises, how can we utilize such a basic information over time? One possibility is to track the fundamental activities and identify the areas that we can have for improvement, such as enhancing family communication. Moving forward, the plan is to examine the relationships among the measured dimensions of the linkage facilitation checklist. For example, is there a relationship between linkage facilitation training and the lived experience and the frequency or duration of the client contacts? Does this change over time? Part of our future work will involve connecting the linkage facilitation checklist to the linkage facilitation taxonomy, as some of the activities assessed in the checklist can be viewed in terms of the taxonomy, which I'll be discussing a little bit further on in this presentation. If we could change slides. Now, the taxonomy really helped us try to consolidate, trying to establish a common language that all of us were talking about. Now, this paper actually has been already published by Hogan et al., and you'll be able to actually read it. Now, in part of, if we change slides, sorry. So in part, really what was the development of this taxonomy was the realization that linkage facilitation practices varied significantly across the hubs. And it became essential for us to try to understand and categorize these nuances. But that still leaves us remaining. What really was the need that we had and noticed in establishing this taxonomy and need for categorizing and understanding things? We could move on to the next slide. Now, the need for the taxonomy really arises from the growing prevalence that we actually see in practice of the use of linkage facilitation, especially in OUD settings, and the diversity of the workforce, including peer support specialists. Current research really lacks a comprehensive framework to try to understand these differences in these services. Therefore, we identified that it was necessary to create that common language and structure to really define and organize the various aspects of linkage facilitation. Could change slides. Now, in the paper, really the goal was threefold. The first one was really to develop a pragmatic lexicon to the array of types of practitioners, the goals they engage with, and the activities associated with linkage facilitation for opioid use disorder. Also was to describe the MOUD services continuum and introduce the linkage facilitation as a commonly deployed practice for opioid use disorders. The final one was to propose an organized conceptual framework, which is a taxonomy, of linkage facilitation for opioid use disorders that focused in on 8 domains. For each of the domains, the article really goes into a definition and the domain basic categories, highlighting key research and practices and practice themes in substance use and OUD care. And it really provides an introduction of recent innovations that are specific to MOUD. Could change slides. Now, when I talk about the MOUD continuum of services, we created this as the framework within the paper, really to look at OUD treatment, which breaks down OUD treatment into the 3 stages. You have your preparation, then you have, which basically looks at preparation with individuals that engage in OUD service and explore medication options. Then we have initiation, where they start MOUD regimen and support from providers, and then moving on to stabilization, where adjustments are made under supervision of optimal results. Now, supporting recovery really involves multitudes of different varieties of avenues that people can do to connect people at these different stages in the continuum and in different ways. And this is where we found the points at where linkage facilitation comes in making it framed within the article. But move on to the next slide. Now, really the taxonomy is broken down into a complex landscape for the linkage facilitation, providing the domains. Now you'll see that the 8 domains listed, from facilitator identity to facilitator's lived experience, right down to the linkage target. Now in those, you will see the different domain categories. So what we're trying to show here is that the differences and show the different variations and nuances and categorizing them within each of these domains. And I'll leave it over to the paper for you to read it to really understand those nuances.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. So we're gonna go into our discussion mode now, and I'll hand it over to Dennis, Dr. Watson. Thank you so much.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Dennis Watson. I am a research scientist at Chestnut Health Systems and a member of their JCOIN Hub. I'm also a member of the Linkage Facilitation Work Group that has brought together folks that are working on a lot of this stuff. I do want to, back up with Anthony's presentation, but a lot of the work that we have been doing around the linkage facilitation has also been in collaboration with another initiative that is funded through NIDA called COARS, the Consortium on Addiction Recovery Science. And there is a paper that has also come out of that work on linkage facilitation, specifically within the criminal justice context. And I saw a question about that come up, so I want to point out that paper, and that is by the lead author is Milan Satcher, that was just published in Health and Justice. And just, I'm going to really quick just hit home on a few points that I think, we're cross-cutting here and worth highlighting before we get into the questions. As Anthony already pointed out, Lori's first statement really was about how this is really a broad term that's being used in a lot of contexts. And we've really seen that today with different folks working in different spaces, having different targets of their intervention in terms of populations being served, and then the different challenges and different requirements that they might encounter depending on that. There's a big, sort of difference between some of the interventions that focus on utilizing people with lived experience as the fulcrum of linkage versus those who that might not be a requirement. So for instance, Chestnut, I don't think we said this specifically, but we do not require lived experience. However, we do have linkage facilitators or linkage managers who do have lived experience. And so, I think that that is an area that we should really begin looking at from a research perspective, is what are the benefits of these different models, and how can lived experience be utilized within a linkage facilitation model. Everybody talked about assessment of needs, goals, and strengths, and how that helped them tailor individualized plans for their clients. Client-centered planning, focusing on harm reduction, using motivational interviewing to make sure we're meeting patients where they're at. And I think Machiste did a really good job, and John also, of talking about how they're meeting clients where they're at within their interventions, and making sure that we are sticking with people through their ups and downs, and we're being non-judgmental when working with them in this capacity. I was really happy to see people talking about the challenges, because I think that does highlight the realities of working in these spaces, and there are challenges both logistically at the system levels, as well as challenges for individual linkage facilitators that we really have to pay attention to. Maggie, I think you did a great job of pointing out how people doing this work are being supported within the Chicago hub. And I've seen that with other interventions as well. The things people face, like vicarious trauma, the struggles with dealing with clients who have slow change, or are maybe, stepping backward, taking one step forward, two steps back, and just really making sure that people are able to process that and work through it, and that we're paying attention to our staff's health and well-being as much as we're paying attention to the health and well-being of our clients. But I also loved how folks talked about the pride and satisfaction that our linkage facilitators feel in their work, as well as how doing this work can be a benefit to people's personal recovery. And when we're talking about lived experience, I think that that's the line we have to be really, really cognizant of, is the line between how this work can facilitate and help personal recovery versus how it may actually, if not given the right supports, be detrimental for folks. And that should be something that we're just as concerned about from a workforce perspective